I'd like to welcome to the podium Lelan Sillin. Lee has been a source of wisdom to the FES committee as the curriculum's grown, and he had a lot of involvement in the development of FLS. And I've asked him to just reflect with us on lessons learned from FLS and how do we implement a new curriculum like this well. Lee?
John, thank you very much. I'm here with probably one of the most undata-driven talks that you're likely to hear. This is really a history talk, if you will, and lessons of hard knocks and some joy along with them. This is not even a really scholarly talk because there's no archives to search. There's no written history. It's really a matter of querying people who have lived through it, and so that's what I've done. I have no disclosures to make, but I do have one disclaimer in addition to that, which I've already said, and that is that while I've talked with a lot of people, the interpretation of what comes out of that those discussions is entirely mine and quite personal. And with that, we'll get started. FLS started more or less in 1997 by a group of then relatively young, starry-eyed, daydreaming, hard-nosed, hard-working, enthusiastic surgeons. Names that you will, in fact, recognize as been very instrumental in the development of this organization. Their goal at the beginning was to establish a program for practicing surgeons. It was to provide them with some educational material and a measurement of knowledge based largely or roughly along the lines of ATLS. And with that in mind, they got started. They put together rather quickly, within the space of a year, chapters for a written study book. This was early in the era of the development of electronic media and formats. So they spent another year or so converting the written material into the electronic format, trying to make it eventually first CD-based and then eventually web-based. They tried to put together a bank of questions which they would accompany this study book, and in the process of doing so decided that in fact because they wanted to make it somewhat similar to ATLS, that they would like to add technical skills. And while there were a number of people out there who were trying to develop technical skills training tools, the group that was most scholarly about it were the group at McGill, and you just heard from Melina, who was instrumental, along with Jerry Freed, in the development of Mistels, which was the McGill, I'm going to get this right, I think, the McGill inanimate system for training and evaluating laparoscopic skills. And there were a series of papers that came out over the course of several years, starting in around 1999, or actually even before then, 97, 96, 98, which began to assess, develop, and validate this set of technical skills. They quickly made a decision that they would like to set some minimum standard for this performance, both on the written test and on the technical skills test. And in doing so, they realized that really what they were doing was trying to develop a high-stakes exam. Now, a high-stakes exam carries with it a real burden to establish validity that will stand up to rather intense scrutiny. And while they did not have a particular in mind at the particular time, the desire to make it a truly credentialing kind of test, they did recognize that, in fact, somebody else may want to do that, and as a result, they really wanted to make it meet these high standards. Arriving at that conclusion, they then recognized that there was that they did not really have the expertise themselves to reach that goal. And so they needed the advice, counsel, wisdom, and help of somebody who was a measurement expert, a psychometrician. And as a result, they, in the end, got together with a woman by the name of Karen Hoffman from the School of Education at the University of Southern California, who then began to give them some advice on how to meet these minimum standards for both the written and for the manual skills. The beta test of the existing question bank that was carried out in around the year 2000 and reinforced the need for just this person, because what they discovered was that most of the questions did not bear up to this scrutiny, and in fact the whole exam, or most of the items, needed to be completely rewritten. At the same time, with the help of Karen, they discovered, or they developed a training program on how to actually train people to write questions for a high-stakes exam. So new questions were written, they were reviewed, analyzed. The exam was validated over the course of the next several years as a high-stakes exam. At the same time, and concomitantly, Karen and the group at McGill worked on the Mistels FLS technical skills exam. The Mistels originally consisted of 7 tasks. This was reduced to 5 as the validation and evaluation went on, and eventually they arrived having done reliability testing, face validity testing, concurrent validity testing, predictive validity testing, and external validity testing on all of these skills to develop, in fact, that which a platform or program which, in fact, met high stakes level. But it took them quite some period of time to do so. In the course of doing that, there was a discussion about what kind of a platform this actually should be carried out on, whether it should be a low-tech, which was the way the program was originally developed, that is, the Mistels program was developed, versus a high-tech, which essentially meant a virtual reality. At the time, there was not, the technology that existed did not allow really for easy transition of these skill sets to virtual reality. And in fact, some would argue that that still doesn't quite exist. FLS was launched in about 2004, 2005 with its first exam. About that time, maybe a little bit antecedent to that, there were discussions with the American College of Surgeons about the program, its utility, and its role in not only in training fellows of the college, but also in training residents. This developed into a formal partnership, which started around 2005 and was fully implemented over a course of about 5 years. Then in 2008, the American Board of Surgery announced that in the future they were going to require that all trainees who are going to sit for the American Board of Surgery exam were going to be required, will be required to have sat for, taken, and passed both aspects of the fundamentals of laparoscopic surgery. Currently, there are ongoing discussions between SAGES, the FLS Committee, American College of Surgeons, with urology, gynecology, surgical first assistants, and OR nurses, all with this intent to broaden the group of people who are exposed to the content of this material. Along the way, there's been significant help. Stort's provided a couple of grants that helped get this thing started initially and provided some in-kind support, or particularly early in its development. Covidian, as you probably well know, has provided a huge amount of support for the implementation and of this, particularly subsidizing the taking of the exam by general surgery residents. And then there's been some help financially from the SAGES Foundation. The cost of this program from start until today has been in the neighborhood of about $5 million, not a trivial amount. So in summary, FLS, it took about 7 years from inception to the administration of the first test. It took about 8 years until there was recognized institutional acceptance by the American College of Surgeons. It took about 10 years from inception till incorporation into the formal educational framework of the profession. And we're now about 15 years out. And still, while FLS is used for GME, it has still not broadly reached the originally intended audience, which is the practicing surgeon. So what are some of the lessons that we've learned from this? Well, they fall into sort of several broad categories: logistical, economic, business, financial, related things, and political. And there's a substantial overlap. The logistical things will influence the economics, to some degree the political things. The economic components will certainly affect the political components, and so on. But from the logistical point of view, the first and probably foremost, or one of the early lessons in this, I would say, is that for your instructional materials, it's imperative to keep them current. In FLS, for a while, they actually languished. The original chapters and so forth that were written actually got to a point where they were 10 years old and virtually outdated, and it took a Herculean effort to bring them up to speed. So if FES is going to learn a lesson, it's important for them to learn to keep the instructional materials current. In developing on the logistical side for the test, there were, so again, sort of broad categories. There are development issues, administration issues, and maintenance and security issues. And those are, again, there's overlap amongst these as well. The written questions, it became clear to those of us involved in FLS that there was a need for a small group of very dedicated item writers who needed to be well trained in writing items for a high-stakes exam. And while it's important to rotate members of the item writing group periodically so that you get fresh faces, fresh ideas, and fresh thoughts, it's important not to do it too frequently or too quickly. There is a need for someone who is a psychometrician or a group of people who are psychometricians to help maintain the question bank, to track and evaluate the performance of the questions, and to help the item writers as they develop the question bank. And this has gone from, in FLS, has gone from a single person, Karen Hoffman, to a commercial group, Criterion, who have been extremely helpful in this regard. On the technical skills side, the choice of a platform is extremely important. It will influence almost all of the rest of what you do. And you have to make a decision whether you're going to do high tech or low tech. There are advantages and disadvantages of each of these. They'll influence your ability to administer the test and its security. It'll influence both your initial and ongoing costs. The low tech allows for the widespread use of the platform for training purposes. High tech makes that harder because of the initial expense, but allows for ease of scoring and perhaps ease of delivery of the examination. Whatever you do, it's important to validate the technical skills at a high-stakes exam level, which takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. The written exam was originally given Actually, I think there was a very brief period of time when it was actually given as a written exam, but very quickly morphed into a web to a CD-based examination, which had its own encumbrances and problems, and then has more recently morphed into a web-based exam, which has allowed for ease of administration. The technical skills exam in FLS is this low-tech examination. It's labor-intensive, both for administration and for scoring, and therefore has some not insignificant issues related to it. In terms of maintenance and security of the exam, the security of the exam is in the questions and answers, and not a surprise. It's imperative to keep secure the pool of questions, and part of your doing that is that it's essential to continually refresh the question bank. So new questions, changing the questions becomes a key point in maintaining the security of the exam itself. For the technical skills side of the thing, the security is in the scoring system. So this is going to be true for both low-tech. Certainly it's true for low-tech and also for high-tech. If you think about it, for the technical skills side of thing, the platform is almost ubiquitously available. The only thing that's not available is how the exam is actually scored. It's imperative that that be the case, because otherwise people will try to game the system. And we suspect that that's likely to be true for the high-tech side of things as well. With a virtual reality or high-tech exam, security may also reside in the actual tasks themselves. So it will probably be important as FES moves forward to think seriously about that and not allow the actual tasks. They may not wish to allow the actual tasks to be practiced. At least the ones that are specifically used in the exam. What is important to recognize is that both the written exam and the technical skills exam need to be proctored, and the technical skills exam, whether it's low-tech or high-tech, will also need to be proctored. On the economic side, it's important to know your costs. It's important to know the cost of your platform, and who will use it as a consequence. In calculating the costs, you need to include not only the physical plant, but also the supplies used to maintain it. You need to understand the costs of test administration, which include not only the test development, but also the support and evaluation and maintenance of the test centers, the system of test centers that exists, the cost of proctors, and the cost of the measurement people who will help you assess, maintain, and evaluate the actual exam itself. It's important to understand that there's a cost in item writing and refreshing the exam, and there's also a cost in evaluating new skills. This is going to be particularly true for the technical skill side of things. FLS has recently had to undergo some of that, as well as they seek to add additional skills to the original 5. It's important to know the benefits and the value of your product. So for FLS, it now is required for the initial application to sit for the American Board of Surgery exam. There's 12 hours of CME that can be earned by taking it. It can be used for maintenance of certification, particularly the CME hours. There's been an increasing interest in using it for credentialing and privileging purposes. And insurance companies, to some degree, have begun to, both liability and patient insurers have been interested in FLS and who has not passed the exam, both in terms of potentially reducing liability premiums and also placing people on a preferred provider list if they've passed the exam. So one of the lessons is that it's important to, when it comes to pricing your program, is to price the program to sustain it. It's like anything, if you don't price it to sustain it, you'll go bankrupt, and while you may have helped society briefly, you haven't helped it in the long term. It costs more than you and others think to actually run one of these things. And it's imperative that people be able to clearly explain the costs and the price to the constituents, that is, the people who will be using it or who are likely to use it. On the political side of things, certainly the association and the alliance, if you will, with the partnership with the American College of Surgeons has been extremely important. It's lent a real imprimatur of legitimacy to the program. It's allowed for a great deal of publicity. It's allowed for wider distribution of it and wider acceptance of it. There is allows the SAGES to share in the finances, both the expenses and the rewards. On the other hand, there are downsides to establishing alliances. The relationship with the college has limited the nimbleness of both the FLS Committee on SAGES and SAGES as a whole. But such is the nature of alliances. They may be cumbersome, but the force of an alliance can be hard to resist, whereas somebody that's without allies may not be quite so powerful. And although no formal alliance has been made with the program directors in surgery, because the program has largely been used for GME purposes, they are a large constituent group. And these are perhaps overstatements, they love the educational materials, but they hate the unfunded mandate. The cost of this is an area in which they provide considerable pushback, and so one needs to be able to clearly articulate what it is that that the benefits are of this and what the actual cost structure is. The relationships with industry are a political one of sorts. They've been largely with Storz and Covidian. They have been very helpful, one might even say critical, if not truly essential, for the initial development and the early implementation of FLS. There are many who believe that, in fact, the program would never have either been developed or implemented had it not been for their assistance. But there is a price for subsidization of the thing. There are those who have questioned the appropriateness of this relationship with industry. And on the economic side, there are those who have argued that subsidizing the cost of it will make it harder for people, or there will be a reluctance to accept it on a long-term basis because when they have to bear the true cost. So, final lessons from this. Keep the main thing the main thing. That is, remember that whatever you start off with, don't lose sight of it. This program started off, as you may recall, aimed at reaching practicing surgeons. It still has yet to do that, even though it's 15 years down the road. And yet that still is the subject of much of the ongoing discussion, as much as GME has been the immediate focus. Recognize that you'll have skeptics, critics, and cynics who are going to challenge both your data and your motives. Understand the capabilities and limits of your test platform. They will constrain you significantly. Understand the costs and benefits thoroughly and be able to communicate them clearly to your constituent groups. Price the program to sustain it. Choose your allies and make alliances carefully, and in doing so, understand their value and limitations before you make them. Validate thoroughly and rigorously your examinations and your materials. always choose excellence, and above all, be patient. Thank you very much.